In today's video, I want to go through the whole process of creating a collage style animation. I love these type of animations because they give me an excuse to play around with some mixed media stuff, which I love. Normally, I'd show you the end result right here, but since this whole video is about the process, I feel like that would take away a bit of that romantic feeling that you get when everything that you work towards finally comes to fruition. But if you are no fun, you can always skip to the timestamp. What makes what we do so special is the process. It's our decision making, how we decide what goes where, when it goes there. To make that process just a little bit easier, I want to say thank you to today's video sponsor, Milanote. Coming up with an idea or getting inspired can sometimes be the hardest part of this process. There's so much inspirational material out there, but sometimes it can be hard or even overwhelming looking for exactly what you need. Keeping track of stuff that catches your eye is great, but if it just stays in your bookmarks on Twitter or Instagram, then you'll probably never look at it again. That's why I love using software like Milanote to help me stay organized, whether that's on a per project basis or just general life stuff. The one thing I love about Milanote is that it kind of feels like my brain, but as a software, because my brain is kind of like a scatterbrain type thing. Like if you had a board with different threads going around, that's kind of what my brain feels like. And a lot of productivity and organization apps are very linear, so sometimes that can really stop my flow or hinder it from fully flowing, which is the exact opposite of what I want in this stage. In this stage, I want to just be able to flow freely and intuitively and instinctively. Anyways, I have a rough idea for what I want for this animation. You can kind of see here, I have my initial board set up with a couple of different columns just to organize it just a little bit. And I want to do this piece kind of about the Air Max 1. I'm a big sneakerhead. I used to be a lot more into it than I am now, but I am still a huge Air Max 1 fan. That's definitely my favorite shoe. So I figured that would be kind of a perfect way to go because, you know, I just think it could be pretty sick and we could do some fun stuff with it. But anyways, I have this main board here and I have some notes where I have this little quote that I just found. I really like this little, an airbag trampoline type of thing, which we're going to be looking into a little bit more. But essentially what I want to do in this main board is just organize it a little bit, get some different notes that I think could look really sick, and then just get a general feel of the project down so that whenever I open it, I know exactly what I'm going to be going into. Outside of that, the first step that I like to do is to create a new board. So I have this mood board here, and usually you just drag it in, mood board right here. You can name it whatever you want. Let's just say new sauce. Not that, but if you double click it, you can click on it up again here and just rename that. And the cool thing about Milanote is that they have so many different templates. I think they have a gazillion, but if you click this more templates, you can see they have a whole bunch, which is super awesome if you need a little bit of help or a direction in terms of where you want to go with this. But generally, when it comes to a mood board, I like to start with a clean plate just so it doesn't interrupt with the flow of what I'm trying to do and like doesn't distract my initial thoughts for the project. But if we go back up here, I can just click up here to go back. I'm just gonna delete this by dragging it into the trash, and then I'm gonna open up my mood board. And you can see already, it gives you a little preview of how many cards you have in there, so you know how much stuff is in every single one as well. It's a cool little feature. I like it, looks pretty cool. But here we have the mood board for the project. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of different things in here. There's some different pictures, screenshots. I've got like little fonts in here with just a little note so I know what the name of the font is. And I did this just by going to Google Fonts and testing out different fonts and all that stuff, and pictures, screenshots, all that stuff. I even have some custom brush strokes that I drew and scanned, and then I just added them in as PNGs just to add to the vibe of the mood board, which I think is super important. In terms of finding inspiration to fill up your mood board, there's a couple of different sources that I really like using. The first one is Pinterest, which is just a great place. There's so much good stuff on there, and it's really easy to find aesthetic and curated stuff. So it's a super great tool if you start out pretty wide and then you can slowly narrow in. The second one is Behance. Again, great place. It's a bit more niche and in-depth than Pinterest, but it's really cool if you need a little bit of background information for a project, or just you have a better idea of what it is that you're looking for, then that's a great place as well. The third one is my bookmarks, whether that be on Twitter or Instagram. I like bookmarking a lot of things that I like seeing, and then I just keep it in there so I have it, and then I can always go back and scroll, or I can add it into a mood board and make it pretty easy for myself and just keep a library of different assets that I found. Now this last one is super underrated, and that is books. Another thing that I love about Milanote, especially in this stage, is, as I mentioned, I want to be able to flow, and there's one specific tool that Milanote has that I love using, and that is the web clipper, which works for either Google Chrome or Arc like I'm using, And essentially what it is, it's an extension that lets you save images from, for example, Pinterest, like I have here. You see, I have this little icon where I can just click save, and then it shows up on my right hand side, and I can pick whatever I want it to save it to. So let's say mood board right here, which is the one we've been working on. And then I just go to hit save. And then if I go back into Milanote, you'll be able to see that we've now got it in here, and we can just drag it wherever we want. So it's super easy for me to look for different things and add them to my mood board pretty quick, which makes it a lot easier than having to go in, copy an image or save an image and then drag it in. Because sometimes in that process, you can kind of get lost in what you were trying to do. But what about inspirations from books? Well, you think it'd be a hassle, but it's actually pretty simple. See, whenever my clone back there is looking through different books, looking for sources of inspiration, all he has to do when he sees something super cool and that he knows I will like, he just has to open up the Milanote Mobile App and take a photo of it, and just like that, it's instantly synced up with my main computer over here, which saves me a lot of time having to go back and forth. And you know, it's always super efficient when you can have a clone look up and scan stuff for you instead of having to do it yourself. And I can just drag it into my mood board and organize it however I want. It just makes it super easy when you have a little clone over there that gets everything ready for you, and you just have to make everything look saucy. Another super clutch thing is being able to add colors in here, which makes it super easy down the line. Since we can just copy the hex code right in here, you can even choose different forms of however you want to display those colors. But it also just helps narrow down the look of the mood board a little bit more. It niches it down and helps you get a better sense of what it is that you're going to be making. Those things are also important. While you want to keep it broad, you also want to make sure that you sort of narrow it down so you don't have 10 different directions you want to go in. In the end, the mood board is to help you narrow down the vision and just taking notes of a couple different things that you think would work really well in whatever you're making. Now, with the mood board done, we can go back into our little main page here and switch over to the storyboard, which is the next step in this. Once again, you can use different templates. They actually have some really good storyboard ones. So if I just type out storyboard here and then open that bad boy up, you can see we can do this. And the reason why it says top pick down in the template is because it actually looks at what you name your boards, and then it goes through its templates and try to see if there's something that will match it. So it makes it super easy. You can always click more templates, like I said before, and search for something like storyboard, where you have a lot more different versions. So you can look through them, click them, and kind of get a preview of it, which I just think is super cool, and it can help you get some really good inspiration as well. But again, the way I like to do this is just starting from a clean slate. So if I go back over, I'm just going to drag this to the trash to get rid of that and open up my storyboard, where I just started from a clean slate. And I love using the built-in draw tool, which is down here, especially in combination with my iPad or the drawing tablet that I have. It allows for really fun and interactive creativity, which I just think adds a layer of fun and just makes it a little bit easier for the thoughts to flow. But if you aren't comfortable drawing, you can always use stock assets, random images you found, AI media, whatever you're comfortable really, whatever floats your boat, you can do it. I just like drawing it out. I will say I keep it pretty simple, as you can see here. I mean, it's just stick drawings, but you can pick different types of brushes you want to do. Like you can increase the stroke width a little bit. If you need something real bold, you can change the color and all that good stuff. But we have this setup right here where I just drew out kind of what I thought, and my main focus for this stage is thinking about how the animation is going to flow. I want to spend some time here and make sure that my story makes sense, that I know how I'm going to go from one scene to the next, and how I can make sure there's a red thread going through the whole piece so that it's not just 10 different things in an animation. Sometimes I'll even go back and forth between the mood board and the storyboard and just add little things. And you know, inspiration can hit you at different times, and sometimes you want to just refine a couple of things, change your mind on something, and that's completely fine. This is the stage where you want to do it and not the animation stage. So spend some time here refining your idea, really thinking it through. And as you can see here as well, I've added a couple notes. Again, I just drew this with the drawing tool, which is super fun. And I think it's a vector because it's super high quality when you draw. Like, it doesn't look pixelated, but essentially it's super easy. Even on a mouse, you can draw pretty good, you know? At least if you've got some drawing skills. That S is not very good, but I like putting on a couple notes in there just to make sure that I can remember what I thought when I made this, because most of the time, let's be honest, I'm not going to remember exactly what I thought in that moment based off of these rudimentary drawings. They are just stick figure drawings at the end of the day. But one thing that I think that the storyboard phase is really helpful for is training that part of your brain that thinks in animation, where you can look at something and instinctively and instantly know how to bring it to life and just spice it up a little bit. That is pretty much it for the storyboard. I mean, we have a couple of different scenes that we know we gotta do. We have a good sense of what we're gonna be doing and what we need to make it. You can see I try to think about as many things as I could in the stage and add a little notes and whatnot, but that leads us to the next segment, which is finding and preparing the assets. This step is pretty easy. What I like to do here is you can add it to any one of these, but I like to take a little to-do section here. Let's just plot it under notes. And all I'm gonna do here is write down the things that I know that I need. So for example, based on a storyboard, I know I need a trampoline asset. I know I need some clouds. I need frames of me performing the little action here, like the jumping and the flying and all that stuff. So I need to get that as well. And for this, let's just put frames of me. I know I need a bunch of images of AMX1s, so images of AMX1s. I know I need some textures, obviously, and a couple other scan things that I want to make. So I'm just going to put scanned textures plus hand-drawn elements. That'll look super sexy, little design thing, kind of like we did in the previous video as well. Lastly, we need some articles / text excerpts. You can see I have a little prompt down here, add a title to this, and yes, I do want to do this, and I just want to name it something that makes sense. So let's just do asset list, like that. And just like that, you've got something that looks pretty sexy. You can even drag this out and put it wherever you want. Just whatever you kind of want to make it look good, you can put it out here. What I love about this as well is that if I open up my phone and go to this card right here, I can have it on my phone and I can check it off, which makes it super easy. So if I just pop that up right there, I can go outside and get what I need and check it off as I need it. So if I check it off on my asset list on my phone, you can see it instantly does it on the screen as well. So it makes it super easy to keep track of everything you need. And I just think it's such a great tool to keep everything organized, but also make it visually appealing, which then inspires and motivates you to keep making more stuff. I'd highly recommend checking out Milanote, especially because it is free with no time limit, so you don't need to pay for it to use it. It's completely free, no trial periods or anything. You can sign up with the link in the description and start planning your next creative project, whether that be an animation, video, edit, whatever you need. You can start making it. As you can see, they have plenty of templates where you can start if you don't have an idea. But with that being said, I just want to say thank you to Milanote for sponsoring this video and just being a great tool that I genuinely love using. For this animation, I want to spend a good bit of time creating my own assets. I like doing this, but I also think it gives it some unique character that you can't make otherwise if you just find stock images on the internet. Not only that, but they're pretty easy to make as long as you dedicate some time to it, like drawing out on a piece of paper and scanning it, or taking photos of shoes that you have laying around where you can then take that into Photoshop, cut it up, and then print it out and do the folding animations. Or even looking really silly while standing in front of a camera and jumping around to get some really nice reference photos for the animation, and even using those photos in the animation itself. You might look really stupid, but it's gonna make a one-of-one product, which is very hard to beat. It does, of course, require a little bit of resources like papers, a printer, a scanner, but most people have a phone and pretty easy access to this stuff. And if you care about the craft, it's a step that you're willing to take. It's also a great way to practice your creativity and get away from the computer a little bit and play around with some physical media, which is something I think lacks a lot these days, where everything is just made on a computer. As you might be able to tell, I use some fairly expensive cameras and equipment, but all this can be done with your phone, so don't get discouraged. Just have fun with it, practice around, and enjoy the process, because at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. Now that we have all the assets ready to go, we can finally hop into After Effects, where I already have a 1920 by 1080 composition set up at 24 frames per second. As per usual, nothing fancy there. All I've done so far is just drag in all of the assets that we're going to be using into the composition, just organize it just a little bit to make it easier on us. But other than that, I have Milanote open as well, just so we can see exactly what we're going to be doing. Essentially what we're doing here is kind of like building Legos. We're following a manual, which is our storyboard, just putting the pieces together, which is going to make this process a lot more simple. And of course, just adding a little bit of that spice along the way, making sure everything looks mucho caliente. Anyways, let's start with the main scene, which is going to be our person jumping on a trampoline. So the first thing I'm going to do here is get my little trampoline out here and our background and just start positioning it around a little bit. So I'm just going to scale this down a little bit, and I'm also going to scale the background down a good bit just so it kind of fits in here. Maybe drag that down just a smidge, take my trampoline and scale it down just a little bit more, and then place it down here towards the bottom to make it look nice and realistic. And of course, what we can do is create a little shape element by clicking the ellipse tool, making sure our fill is set to black, and just draw out a shape that sort of looks like the trampoline was just going to function as a bit of a shadow. And we can add false box blur to this and just increase that a good bit so we get a nice feathered shadow, place it below the trampoline, and just decrease the opacity just a little bit. So now it kind of looks like we have a shadow below it, which just gives it a nice little bit of added layer of realism, I suppose. Just looks super clean. We can also go ahead and add some false box blur to the background as well, just to get a little bit of separation here. And I'll just set it to something like 6 and set the iterations to 6 as well, just to give a nice little bit of depth of field. Maybe even set that to 4, just so it's not super out of focus. Then we can add our person. And I have this pre-comp in here where I have all my peoples, and that's just gonna make it a little bit easier for us. We can pick and choose exactly what we want and the length of it. So what I'm gonna do is drag that pre-comp in here, and that's gonna make it nice and easy. What I've done is essentially create a Photoshop file and just lined it all up so I can make sure that the ground context stays the same. I'm just gonna scale this down a good bit. Let's do 50, and then maybe link our shape layer, which is gonna be our shadow, to the trampoline. So when we scale the trampoline down, that scales with it, and we can keep the proportions intact and move it around a little bit easier, just so we can make sure that we maintain some nice ground contact. I'm also going to enable the preserve rasterization or preserve whatever collapse transformations thing, which just means that we can move a character up above it and it'll still show. Just makes it a little bit easier to work with. We can always go into our pre-comp, hit Command K, and just increase the height a good bit, just so that we can make sure we have some room, because we might want to move some of these characters around. But to begin with, I'm going to go 2 frames forward. I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to hit Option and then right bracket to trim all the layers. So it trims the layer after where your keyframe, like your marker is, so that it'll be 3 frames of these. And I'm going to select all these layers, and then I'm going to use motion tools to keep it nice and simple. I'm going to set the amount to 3, so we're going to separate or stagger each one by 3 frames, because that's the length of it, and we can pick whichever way we want. So in this case, I have the first one at the bottom, so I want to pick this staircase going up, and that'll give me a nice little sequence here of some jumping going on. Just keeping it very, very nice and simple. But let's go back into this main composition and go forward a little bit. So here we have this little jump, and then this right here is where we want to switch into the next sequence. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. And then we'll just take this first layer and let's just move these out a little bit so that we just have a little bit more time in this first initial piece. I'm just going to move that out like that. And then I want to essentially create a bit of, I don't want to say tension, but almost sort of anticipation. So I want it to go down, and then I want to hold this for 1 extra frame. And then I want to speed this up a little bit so that this next one is maybe on 2 frames. And then we have this jump all the way up in the air, which we're going to have all the way up here, and maybe make that an extra frame longer. And then so we just have something that looks a little bit different. Just changing the pacing of it a little bit will really help sell it a little bit. And as you can see here, it just looks a lot nicer in terms of the jumping movement that we have here. Going back into this, we can add a couple more detail elements to this. So let's add the clouds, and in this case I've just found this from Texture Lab, and we're going to layer this a little bit to create a really nice looking scene. Let's start by taking this one and just hitting off to bring up the rotation, just rotate it around a little bit. Let's place one right about, scale that down a little bit more, and place that maybe over this way, rotate it a little bit more, kind of place it in front a little bit. You can change the blending mode by hitting Shift and minus to cycle through and see something that looks kind of look good. You can always add a tint effect to it as well if that's something you're interested in. I think overlay, maybe even lighter color looks pretty good. I think that looks pretty solid. Let's add a limit color to this so that we can match the warmth of it to the other clouds in the back. And I'm just going to open up the basic corrections and just increase the temperature of it a little bit to make it look like these clouds down here. Then we can duplicate this and put one over here. Let's rotate it even more, something like that maybe, and place that over this way. And I want to make sure that some of these clouds go on top, because we're going to be zooming up a little bit so that when our character jumps, we kind of have him in the middle the whole time. And when I say him, I obviously mean me. Now I am going to take this and just move it down a little bit so that we are actually inside the trampoline when we make our jump, like that. Now that we have that in place, we can create a null. So I'm going to right click down here and go to new and create a null object. And this is just going to let us move the scene out. So I'm going to take all of these layers and I'm just going to parent it all, except for the shadow, of course, to the null layer. And that's just because our shadow is already parented to the trampoline, so it'll move as well. But now if we drag this down, we obviously want some sky to be up here where our guy is going to be. But to do that, we're just going to select our little background and add the reptile effect. We are going to expand it upwards just a good bit, and then we're going to do an unfold instead. And that's just going to, now I do want my guy to be up a little bit more because I do essentially want it to be about up here. So going back into my falling pre, let's just move him up a good bit more until we get a nice little somewhat centered right there. I think it looks pretty good. And so we can keyframe the position right there of the null. And let's just go back to the beginning and set that to 540, which is right in the middle. So now we should have something that looks kind of like that. And we're just going to move it so that the movement starts as we jump up, not beforehand. So we get the spring down and then the movement up. Let's just hold our guy for a couple more frames to right about here. So if I go into the falling pre, I'm just going to extend this a couple more frames like that and move the rest forward a little bit. So we just get a couple more frames of him being up in the sky before he moves back down. Let's just do a couple more like that. Now we need him to move back down again. And the way we're going to do that is just, let's start right about here maybe. I think that might be a pretty good place to start. Move all of these back and let's move this right in the middle of these two. So we have it come down, and then the impact, let's just extend that couple frames because we're going to be landing pretty hard and doing a nice little animation over this. But so we land and give it a little bit of impact before we move back up. Maybe just, that might be just a little bit too long. I think that looks pretty good. And then we have the spring up again, which we'll play around with in a little bit. But for now we have the moving up, and then we need him to move back down again. So let's say right about here, keyframe the position of that null and go back down to 540 like that. So now we have him moving up and moving down. I want to hold it where he lands. So essentially this one right here, maybe just drag it down a little bit more so that's a bit closer to the ground here. Actually, I might do it right above, and then we are going to add a couple more frames to this. Drag this out a little bit more. What I want to do here is essentially add a little fold out of some of the shoes that we captured and add that to a little bit of transition to give my character the shoes on. And let's just move that down a little bit so that we actually get to see his feet as he's landing right there. And what we're going to do here is go into our project, and I'm going to find the shoes that I'm wearing, which is the black jewels. And I'm just going to go in and drag these into the composition in here. Wrong shoe, obviously. I need the DSM collab. Silly me. But drag these bad boys in here. And then for this one, we want it to, let's start it right here. So I'm just going to trim these layers to start right here. And I'm going to start by soloing these out. And I need to line them up first and obviously scale them down a little bit to fit. So I'm just going to scale these bad boys down. And then I'm going to hide everything but two of them. So I have the full one and then the one before it. Decrease the opacity a little bit. And I'm just going to use some of these landmarks, in this case the Nike logo, to sort of match it up as good as I can. And that's just going to make the effect look a little bit nicer. And then reveal the next one. T to open the opacity, and again make sure that the Nike logo right here or anything else kind of lines up perfectly. And then we can unsolo all of this, and let's just pre-compose this, and let's name this DSM pre and add that to a precuts folder, which is already did. Super nice, and we can hide that. So now we have this little thing here, and let's just go into this, go to 2 frames, select the layers, then hit the brackets to crop them all, and we can right click and then go to keyframe assistant and sequence layers and hit OK. And then the last one, we're just going to drag out a good bit so that it won't die on us. And then playing that back, we now have a fold out animation. That is pretty neat so far. So now we just have to link it up to our little character down here. So we're going to scale this down, move this forward a little bit so we can see the full shoe sort of. And all I'm going to do here is sort of match it onto the foot. I don't mind it being a good bit bigger than what it would actually be, just because I feel like it gives it a nice stylized look. We can always duplicate this and put it in the back, and then hit R and Shift S, scale it down just a little bit, and then move that to be the back foot I just think that might look super cool. I think that looks pretty sick. Select these two, move them over. So we have this. We obviously want them to be fully folded by the time that hits. So I'm just gonna take all these layers and move it out this way. And then we can trim these layers right here. Boom, and extend that. So we get that womp, which I just think is a nice little transition that just, I feel it adds to the style of like the collage animation. We have some nice mixed media stuff. But going back into our main composition, we now have something that looks kind of like this. What I might do is just to give it a little in-between frame, going into our falling pre-comp in here, I'm just gonna split all of this, just select these layers. Let's just move them all right here, hit U. I'm gonna split them, and then I'm just gonna move them down a little bit so that they are a lot closer to where the foot comes in. And I think that'll just give it a nice little in-between frame. Might even move these up a little bit more, just to give us a nice, just an extra layer of movement. But now we have this nice little piece. And all I wanna do here in this case is I need to add a little bit of zoom, because as you see in Milanote, our little storyboard in here, I want a more zoomed in look when this paper animation comes in. So that will be our next step to do. And for that, I'm just gonna add an adjustment layer, and I'm gonna add a transform effect to this. And all I'm gonna do here is just add a couple of keyframes. So right here, let's keyframe the position and the scale, then hit U, and we can change the color of this to make it nice and organized in here. Just change it to a different color. And right here, zoom in a good bit, and let's add some easing to that. Let's just add a sexy speed for now, see what that looks like. So we have jump up and down with the animation coming in. Let's just move these a couple frames before. Might even want to move this up just a little bit more so we get a little bit more of the shoe in there. Then I just want to cut this just a little bit because I feel like he's up there for just a frame too long. So just take that, cut it like maybe 1 or 2 frames, select all of this and move it back just a little bit. And then we'll hit U in here just to see our keyframes. He goes up and then he goes back down. So we might move this just 1 or 2 keyframes over as well. Just do 1. I think that looks super, super solid. We are gonna add some more movement to this, and this time we are gonna follow this guy up. I'm just gonna hit P on our null layer and keyframe the position and move up. And let's just reposition this guy because we need him to be all the way at the top pretty well. All the way up there. We get a nice little jumping. Let's just extend these guys just a little bit. Move all these out just 1 frame like that. So we get a nice little jump. This one, boom. I want this one to be pretty high up. Next guy to be even higher up. But now essentially what we have is this little jumping animation. We obviously want to follow it so that we can see our guy here. And I just want to see the shoes actually. That's my main goal. I just want to kind of track the shoes a little bit. That looks pretty sweet. So we got to move it up. And then all I'm going to do here is just add a little bit of animation to this guy coming down into frame. So let's go into this and just keyframe this falling guy a little bit. Extend him out. And then hit P to bring up the position. And all we're gonna do here is keyframe the position. Let's go to the first frame of this piece and move him up out the way. And let's go forward a little bit and just move him down a little bit. Make sure he is in frame in here. Move him down a little bit more. Maybe right about there is pretty good. So now we have him come up and then this guy falling down. And all we're gonna do here is accentuate it just a little bit. So let's send it up just a little bit more with this up here. So I'm gonna hit U to bring up the keyframes, and I'm gonna keyframe the position, and I'm just gonna move it up a little bit, extend this out just a little bit like that, boom. And then we are gonna follow back down to him. What we can do is right here, let's do right about here, keyframe the scale as well, and go out here, and just scale it out just a little bit so we get a little bit more breathing room. Spray around with the position just a little bit, make sure those keyframes look pretty good. So playing that back now, we have some way jumps up, lands, jumps back down, and then just a little bit of movement to get him falling down. And let's just add a little bit of snapping out kind of movement. It looks like he's kind of falling, picking up some pace, and maybe even add some sexy speed to this piece of motion here. Get him up. And we just need to work on this cut a little bit. So maybe extend that out just a little bit more. Extend that out that way. She might even take these and add the same type of easing where we follow this guy. These keyframes, move it up a little bit so that we kind of get a little bit more of a snappy look, and make sure You can even go to this exact keyframe and just move this. Boom. So now we have something that looks kind of like this. I think we're getting pretty well on the way. We've got a nice little bit of motion here. We've got him jumping up, coming down, and then falling down. And now we're just gonna keep animating this little bit of fall that is going on right here. And to do that, we are gonna use some more clouds, these clouds as well. So all we're gonna do here is let's take these clouds and hit P to enable the position. So once we get to a still stand, what we can do is just keyframe the position, go forward a little bit, and drag them up to make it look like we are falling through. So these clouds are gonna go up, and then we can duplicate this, duplicate these clouds, and let's just hit U to show the keyframes and trim them at the beginning. And then we're just gonna drag them below so that they're coming through the screen kind of thing. Let's duplicate this again, move them out a little bit, stagger this movement around just a little bit, maybe duplicate it once again, and move this out a little bit more, just so we get some nice moving clouds throughout, and it kind of looks like we are falling throughout. Another thing we can do, we can take one of these clouds, duplicate this, and put it at the back, and then all we're gonna do here is, let's go back to the beginning, hit U, and then remove all the keyframes from this layer, and let's just center that up right in the middle, and drag that up to be right here, and decrease the opacity a good bit, just so it's like an additional cloud almost, that just gives us a little bit more movement. And then again, we can keyframe the position of this just to move very, very slowly, because kind of like in real life, if something is further away, it'll move a lot slower than something that's closer. So this big cloud in the background will just move ever so slightly. And now we have something that looks sort of like this. And let's, right here, we have this guy starting, but I might just drag this out a little bit so that we just get a little bit more movement. Let's just do a couple more frames, just so there's nothing on the screen. Just drag these out just a little bit more. Maybe move these clouds just a little bit before. That might have even been too much. So I think that is pretty good. One thing we can add to this is, I think usually I wouldn't do this, but I think motion blur might look very good on this, just because it is kind of a mixed media type thing. So taking some digital elements and combining them with some mixed media stuff. So I'm just gonna select everything and add motion blur to it. I'm just gonna remove it from the things that we don't want motion blur on. So I'm definitely gonna make sure that it's not on the falling pre, and I also wanna make sure, I think that's pretty much it actually, because the rest we kind of want, except for this, maybe the adjustment layer we don't need it on. So let's have a look at what that looks like. I think that's pretty sick actually. And now what we can do to this is add a little bit of motion to this. So I'm gonna add inside of the composition with our falling guy. We already have the first pair of shoes, which is this one. And now we're just gonna add the other kinds, which is essentially the same thing we're gonna do. Is just dragging them in, pre-comping them, and making sure they're all lined up. So let's take the black jewels and just drag those in there, and pre-comp that. Name this black jewel pre. And let's open up that pre-comp and just make sure that we are sizing them pretty nicely and all that good stuff. So now we have all the shoes nice and marked up. And all I want to make sure here when I add them to this character is that we don't use two of the same right off another. So like the black jewels and the red jewels look very similar. So I'm just going to stack them a little bit. And I want to end with the DSM ones, just because I feel that's kind of the shoe that he's wearing or I'm wearing. So that will be the last pair. So I'll do black jewel, wolf gray, red jewel, and then DSM. And I'm just gonna stagger these a little bit. But first, I'm just gonna put them in position. So I'm just gonna rotate them, scale them down a little bit, and make sure that they kind of fit where I want the shoe to sit. And again, it doesn't matter if they are like a bit too big or anything like that. We just want them to look sorta in the right position. So we have this right here, boom, and then we're just gonna take these and link them to our guy so that they come within the motion as well. So they follow along with that. And we can start staggering them just a little bit. So I'm just gonna select them all, and let's just do 8 frames, and then I'm just gonna stagger them using motion tools. And let's start right about here. When he starts falling down a little bit, we'll have them come in. Just make sure that we don't overlap these. So this one comes in, and then the next one can come in, and then let's see, this one, move that one up here, and that one come in, and then the last one right here. So now we have all the shoes coming in one by one, kind of overlapping, going through a couple of them. And you can duplicate all of these, and let's just move them to the top and move them to position them for the back foot. Again, so rotate them and just scale them down ever so slightly, just for some perspective, and just move them right there. Bada bing, bada boom. And let's just stagger these just a little bit so they're slightly offset from the front and the back, just to make it look pretty cool. And I think that looks pretty sick, if I do say so myself. I think that looks pretty sweet. The only thing is, maybe keep the shoe on him until he gets to like up there, or at least jumps up out of the shoe. So just keep the shoe for just a couple of frames longer, and let's just move him above this guy, so we have something that looks kind of like, I want it just a frame, couple frames longer, like that, just to make it look like we're jumping out of the shoes almost. And I think that looks pretty sick. So now we can go into our falling guy, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take all these layers, I'm gonna pre-comp it, and I'm just gonna name this falling person pre, and then I'm gonna enable the collapse transformations, and then of course we can add the transform effect again like we had it before. Just alt click the position and add a wiggle expression 1,10, which will just give it that extra bit of movement. So now we have this nice little sequence here where we're jumping down, come back up, and then falling down throughout the sky with a little bit of movement on that. We might add a couple more skies in there. Let's just take these two, duplicate that in, move that over a little bit, so that we are not completely bare bones all the way throughout. And move that over just a little bit more. So now we have a good few layers of clouds. We have something that looks pretty cool. And now I want to move into the title scene, which is gonna be where we have this lost scene that is like the Nike Air, lighter than air type stuff. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a solid. I'm just gonna name this background and change the color to a off-whitish color, F3, 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 super nice, super neat. And I'm just gonna place this at the very top. And let's say we fall down a little bit right here, and right about this area, I want to start going into that a little bit after this final shoe kind of reveals in. So that right there is pretty good. For this, we have a couple of assets I want to be using for this. First is the swooshes. So I'm just going to select all these swooshes and drag them in. And I'm going to move it right to where they start. And I'm going to do, let's do 2 frames. So we're going to go 1 frame forward, and then I'm going to clip these layers. And then I'm just gonna go right click and keyframe assistant, sequence layers, and hit OK. And I'm gonna change the color of this to maybe a green color to separate it a little bit. And I want this to start a little bit before we get into it, so that it kind of uses that as a bit of a transition to get into the final scene. But I do want to scale these down just a little bit, something like that. And then we get this nice little match cut sequence type thing. Or at least that's how we're gonna transition into it. But we have this. And then I want the title, of course, which is Nike Air. So I'm gonna take this Nike and this Air, drag them in, and let's start them right here, just a little bit before the animations themselves. And then we'll just scale this down a good bit and just line this up so that it is centered nice in the middle. We can open up our grid here, maybe scale that down a little bit more, reposition that to be nice and clean looking. And move that to be, boom, that looks fairly centered. And I'm just gonna hit P to bring up the position for this. And I'm just gonna keyframe the position and go back to the beginning and move it down a little bit. And then we can add the super sexy in speed, which is this one. Just add that. So it's just gonna come in, boom, super clean, drag these out a little bit more and have the air come in just a couple frames after. And then we are gonna add the lighter than air that we had before, and let's just drag that in and trim that up so it comes in somewhere along right here, maybe a couple frames after, just to give the Nike Air a little bit of time. Scale it down to be the same size as this, so 34%, just to make sure that the thickness, like the boldness of the letters, is pretty even. And I'm just gonna position that right below, sort of in the center here, something like that. And we can take these 3 layers and let's create a null by going up to layer, new, and null object. Boom, place that up there. Take these, parent them to the null, and then hit P. So a little bit before it comes in, let's keyframe the position, and then a couple frames after it comes in, let's open up our grid and move that up to be nice and centered. And then we can add a little bit of sexy speed to this for a nice bit of movement. So boom, right there. Maybe move this over just one frame. So now we have something that looks kind of like that. Just a nice little bit of snappy movement. One thing I do want to add is just a nice sort of hand-drawn look kind of feel thing. So I'm going to hit G to bring up my pen tool, and I'm going to turn off the fill and enable the stroke. And let's just select a similar color to this, something like that. And then all I want to do here is do a little bit of like almost like a circling kind of line here that's eventually going to circle in around our letters here. And let's just trim that layer up and open up the parameters for it. Go to add a trim paths, and open that up, set the end to 0 and keyframe that at the very beginning. And then go forward, set the end to 100 so that we get this nice moving in type of animation. And then let's go 1-2 frames forward, keyframe the start, and then set the start to 100 a couple frames later so that we get a nice little drawing type of thing. Might even space this out a little bit more, and I want to start it just a little bit before, so we have it come in, let's say right about here. So play that back, get this nice little animation that kind of takes our attention and focuses towards what we're actually trying to read. And we can even change the color of this to maybe a nicer something color, something like a nicer red or something like that. Actually, a blue might be nicer, or a yellow, something. Maybe, you know what, Nike orange. How could I even go wrong with that? But I think that looks pretty sweet, and I like it being on top as well. What we can do is just add some turbulent displays to this, just to give it a little bit of texture. And I'm just gonna set that to 30 for the amount and 2 in the size. And that's just gonna give it just a little bit of texture so that it kind of matches the thing or like the handwritten text. Make it just a little bit bolder, like that. And then go into the stroke and change the line cap to a round cap, just to make it round at the very bottom here. And I think that looks pretty nice. You can always duplicate the turbulent displays, and then on the first instance set it to something like 8x8, which is just gonna give it a little bit more oomph, but I think that looks pretty sweet. Let's add a little bit of a detail element to this, which is this sketch that I found from the website where I was looking for quotes and whatnot. And we can add a color key to this to remove the background pretty easily, just like that, and just increase that a good bit. And let's just position it somewhere down here, decrease the opacity of it a little bit. We just want it to be a nice like detail element sort of in the background type of thing. And we'll have that come in right as our background comes in. And now we can start finessing it a little bit more and really tying everything together. So what that might look like is, let's take for this, for example, I want it to zoom into the shoes to give it a little bit more emphasis on it. So what we can do is our null here, which is parented to, which is everything is parented to, we can hit P and Shift S and keyframe all of that. So I'm just going to keyframe both of this right here and then go forward a little bit, and then I'm going to zoom in a good bit into our background here and kind of center up the shoes a little bit. Let's do maybe this front shoe, open up our grid and move that to be right in the center so that we just get a little bit more focus on that. We might even take this and just move it over just a little bit more so that we get it a little bit sooner. That might be too much, but something like that might be pretty good. And let's just add a little bit of sexy speed to that so it's not super boring. Speed that up just a little bit, make it a little bit snappier, like that. And then we have that moving in, and then right before, or right as this logo comes in, I want to turn the shoe to kind of fit so we get a bit of a match cut. And what we can do is, if we take this falling guy thing here, and let's just hit Y to bring up the anchor point, and let's just move this right down here. And it won't change anything of any of the stuff we've done beforehand, but it will make it a bit easier for us to rotate the leg of this guy. So hitting R and P, we are simply gonna go forward a little bit to right before this comes in. So let's say right here, keyframe the position and rotation for the guy with the shoes, go forward until the frame where it kind of comes in, and just rotate this around. And we'll just have to play with the position just a little bit. So it kind of looks like we're rotating in, and then we get kind of a match cut sort of thing. And we can just add a bit of sexy speed to this as well. And let's just move this over just a couple of more frames so that it's a little bit smoother in terms of the transition between the scenes. And let's start adding just a little bit of flavor to this, some texture. So for the falling person, I'm gonna add a halftone effect, which is a super neat little effect that's just gonna give us a nice bit of texture. And all I'm gonna do here is go into the color and change it to RGB, so we still get to keep the color. I'm just gonna scale this down a good bit. Let's enable full so I can see it actually properly. Like that, increase the brightness and the contrast a little bit, which is gonna make it look a lot sicker. So we have a nice little halftone kind of look, which is just a nice little subtle detail to add to it, I think, at least in my opinion. And you can always play around with that a good bit. But outside of that, let's add to the background. I'm gonna duplicate our background and I'm gonna add an extract effect. And let's just solo this so we can see what it's doing. But essentially, I've done this before, but it cuts out either the highlights or the blacks. So I'm just gonna move this over so we just get the highlights, just feather it out a little bit. And then we're gonna add a deep glow, set the radius something like 800 and exposure something like 0.3, which is a very subtle effect, but it just gives it just a little bit more, hard to explain, but kind of like a sparkle almost. Now let's add an adjustment layer, and I'm gonna add a posterized time to this, and I'm gonna set that to 6. Actually, let me set that to 12. And then I'm just gonna go in, Shift Command Y, and rename this to ADJ, do a posterized time. And then let's add another adjustment layer. And again, you can rename this. We're gonna name this Shake. And we're gonna add a transform effect to this. And I'm gonna set the scale to something like 102. And I'm gonna add another wiggle expression that will be the same as before, wiggle 1,10. And that'll just give the overall composition just a little bit more movement, just make it feel a little bit more dynamic. You can play around if you want something that's a bit more jittery, but in this instance, because it is a bit more naturey, I think that the more flowy effect will look a little bit better. We're gonna add another effect below it, which we are gonna rename to Focus Breathing. And that'll just give us a little bit of oomph, and I'm gonna add a fast box blur. And all we're gonna do with this effect in particular is adding a little bit of focus breathing in some elements just to make it look a little bit nicer. So for example, in the beginning, if we set keyframe the blur radius, and I'm just gonna set the iterations to 6 just for slightly smoother blur, go 3 frames forward, set it to something like 4, go 3 frames forward and set it to 0. We now get a tiny bit of focus breathing. If we have U, I'm just gonna take the last one, just extend it out a little bit so it's a bit of a smoother exit. And we can use it for a couple of different places, like right here. We might wanna take this and just move it over a little bit so that we just get a tiny bit of focus pull. And let's do it again right around here. So I'm just gonna copy and paste these keyframes and just add that little bit of blur as we go up. And let's add it again right here. Boom. And I just think that looks super sick generally. And we can add another one right there. Boom. And another one right as we transition into this, just for a little bit of oomph. We can also add another effect to this. We're gonna add a transform effect, and we're gonna add some slider controls, and we're gonna make 2 of them, because then we can keyframe some impact zoom type of thing. And this is very useful in instances where we already have some zoom or where we want a little bit more impact. So for example, this jump up, if I go in and keyframe the scale and alt click the position, and then I'm just gonna type in wiggle, and then I'm gonna use this pick whip, and I'm gonna select the first slider control, comma, and then the second slider control. Gotta make sure I actually have a comma in there, like that. That'll just let us keyframe the wiggle of it. So we can keyframe the 2 slider controls and then hit U to show the keyframes on this layer. And let's go forward a little bit to right about here, and then set the scale to something like 120 and the 2 slider controls to 10 by 10. Go back to where it's zoomed out and just set it back to 100 and 0 and 0. And that'll just give you a little bit of like a impact zoom type of thing. And it might even look better when we land. So we can always take these over and just right where we land, give it just a little bit of impact, which I think looks pretty cool. And the same maybe right around here. So I'm just gonna copy and paste that and move that right there. Maybe even a little bit. Kind of zoom in on this, maybe move that out just a little bit. I think that looks pretty sweet. And then I'm just gonna hit U to hide everything, show our 2 layers again, the post-rest time and the shake. And now I do have some textures that I want to add to this in terms of just spicing it up to extra bit. And these are just some overlay textures I've made from still textures. So I'm just going to drag them in. I recommend everyone have a folder like this, but let's scale that down a good bit since they are 4K and we don't need them that big. Change the blending mode to multiply for this one, add to this one. And I think actually that the paint texture as well is going to look super sick for this. And I'm just going to scale that one down. And then I'm gonna set that to overlay and decrease the opacity just a little bit and put it all below the post-rest time and the paint texture below the particles. And that is pretty much it for the textures in terms of this. I think that looks super simple. You can play around adding some paper textures as well. That could look super sick for this scene, for example. The only last thing, of course, we're gonna add some grain, make a solid, name this grain, set the color to 80-80-80. And enter that in, and then add the add grain effect. And then we want to add a tint effect to it. And we're going to set the viewing mode to final output and the preset to Codec Vision 800T. Now, the reason we add the tint effect is because you might want to do the monochromatic, but it turns it kind of like a purple greenish. So it's not true black and white, which is just not going to work as well with the overlay blending mode that we are going to be using. So enable the tint, and then we can just pre-comp that, and we want to make sure that we move all attributes into the new composition and just name this grain pre and set the blending mode to overlay, put it below the post-rest time. That's just going to give us a nice little bit of texture in there. And with that being said, here is the final reveal. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was definitely fun to make. I love doing mixed media stuff and just playing around with taking photos in real life and then just putting it into After Effects, see what I can do. And it just gives it a little bit of a different vibe than if you were to not do that. But again, I just want to say thank you to Milanote for sponsoring this video. They were a great help in keeping all this organized, making sure I had everything in order to be able to make this piece. Again, you can use the link in the description to get that. Also, if you want the project files, they are obviously available on my Patreon at patreon.com/Mapal, or there is a link in the description if that's easier for you. But yeah, I just want to say thank you. Hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you are inspired to go and do some of this yourself. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you and peace out.